Well everyone, it is time for us to talk about none other than the Google Pixel 5a and see how this phone holds up in 2022. Now this phone hasn't really been out for even a year yet, but it's still a very solid pickup that Google is still selling brand new. The Pixel 6a should be right around the corner very soon, but with this specific device, I think it was still a pretty good option and I think it was a really good phone that Google made overall. I wasn't a massive fan of them hiking up the price a little bit from the Google Pixel 4a, but this is kind of in the middle between the Pixel 4a 5G and the standard Pixel 4a, so I do understand what they were kind of going for with this specific device, but at the end of the day, it's a very solid phone. I think it's still very good, and if you want to pick it up, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there. You can actually help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside of this specific device, this phone has a beautiful 6.3 4-inch display. Now this is a 1080p panel, so it's not, 4K or anything crazy. I don't even know if there are any 4K phone panels, but because this phone is at $449, it is actually a pretty good price tag for a phone like this. It's a hole punch display. It doesn't have 90Hz or 120Hz or anything crazy, but it's still a pretty good panel. I will say compared to the standard Samsungs or even like a Pixel 6 display, this thing isn't nearly as good as those panels, but it's not super far off, and I do think if you need a phone with a decent panel at a budget, I don't think this is a bad option by any means. Now you have a USB Type-C port on the bottom of this thing, which is great, and on the back you have the standard type of aluminum type of back, and feeling of this phone, it feels very similar to something like a Pixel 4a, but it does feel a little bit more expensive. It doesn't feel as plasticky because it's not completely made out of plastic, and it's still a pretty, premium feeling phone at the end of the day. So I do think with the way this phone feels, it looks very good for the most part. It still feels very good, and for a $449 phone and even cheaper in the used market, I think the outside looks fairly good for the most part. And this thing has a fingerprint sensor on the back, which is really nice, has that dual camera setup on the back too, and I think the design of this phone is still very common to kind of today's standards. Now in terms of the camera setup on the back, this thing has that dual camera setup, so it's a wide angle lens and an ultra wide sensor. So this is where things get a little bit more interesting. So you can do 4K videos on the back. There's no 4K at 60, no 8K capability, no 8K or 4K on the front either. So like I said, keep that in mind. I hope you don't think this phone has like the greatest camera of all time, because now there is 4K at 60 on the back, so keep that in mind. You do have the ability of filming 4K at 60 videos on the back, which is really good to see. Unfortunately, we don't have 4K on the front, which honestly is kind of a commonplace nowadays. Even 1080p at 60 on the front would have been really nice. Unfortunately, this phone did not have it. I don't think it's like a deal breaker or groundbreaking thing that this phone doesn't have it, but like I said, it would have been nice had it had it, but it's totally okay and it's totally understandable. If you're somebody who wants to film videos like on TikTok or Snapchat or Instagram or anything like that, you're building, basically using stories and other things like that, I think this is a good camera for it. Again, it's not going to be perfect. The thing that limits it the most, I think, is probably its stock and bare bones architecture. Although it has the ultra wide sensor, it doesn't really have too many crazy features built into this camera, and I honestly don't see Google teaming up with other social media applications to port over a ton of their features and improve the quality for those built-in apps. So things like, phones like Samsung, Samsung Galaxy S22, one of its killer features, or one of the things that Samsung really focused in on, was actually improving the video and, recording quality within those social media apps. Did they do a great job? Honestly, I think it really wasn't even that great of an execution, but I think that was a step in the right direction, and I really liked how Samsung even offered and mentioned that. Unfortunately, with these phones, if you're trying to go and get the best camera quality, it's definitely not bad, and for that type of phone, I do think it's actually pretty decent. But if you're trying to go and take it up a notch and try to get a really good camera for the price tag, I think you could probably do something like, I think you might be, able to do a little bit better with other phones in the used market. I think maybe even like a used Pixel 6 at this point could be cheaper than this thing. So that may be something else you may want to take a look at as well. So in terms of the camera setup, that kind of covers it up there. I kind of talked about that quite a bit. Now in terms of the actual software inside, this is again one of the best features about this phone in my opinion. Having the stock software within a device like this is so important and so crucial for the whole entire phone's landscape, because you don't want to go ahead and get a phone and already have it outdated. But another really cool thing is by having a phone like this, Google Pixel 5a, you can get a phone that's going to be here for quite a bit of time. This is not going to be a device that's here today and gone tomorrow. And with, a phone like the Google Pixel 5a, because it is still going to be supported with software for many years to come, that basically means that there's also going to be quite a bit of a development community behind this phone too. Because Google allows us to go ahead and basically unlock a lot of different things with our phone. If you want, you can root in custom ROM it. Although custom ROM community isn't as crazy as it used to be, there's there's still going to be third-party development for this phone, which I love seeing. So at the end of the day, that is another really cool thing that you have the advantage of doing. And with something like the Google Pixel 5a, I'm honestly really happy that Google is allowing us to kind of do these things. And this is still a very solid phone from that standpoint as well. So looking at the future, I think this phone has a long future ahead of it, and I'm personally a fan of it for sure. Now in terms of performance, this device has that Qualcomm Snapdragon 765G chipset inside, it has the Adreno 620 GPU, the Titan M security module, whatever that means, and it has 6GB of RAM inside. Now, honestly, anything I did with this phone for, the duration I've been using it, it's been perfectly fine. It's been able to do everything fine that I've been throwing at it, and I've been using this phone a lot on my second channel. Sometimes whenever I would use an Android phone to demonstrate, X, Y, and Z, this phone would be one of the phones I would talk about and use, and it can kind of handle everything I threw at it. Now, that may be a little bit of an overstatement, but I say that to say this phone has a really good amount of performance inside of it, and I think for all, intensive purposes, this phone from a basic performance standpoint is great. If you're trying to step it up a notch and you're trying to compare this thing to something like a Pixel 6, it's going to be a little bit of a different story. I've seen very similar speeds from something like a Pixel 5a and a Pixel 6, but right now the Pixel 6 with its Google Tensor chipset, and that is what has the bigger, advantage, I would say, just because first of all it has more RAM with, the Pixel 6, but also it has a little bit of more of a, future and development community from Google themselves. So that is probably one big thing to keep in mind. I think with something like the Pixel 5a, again, Google is really focusing in this phone to be that budget tier device. So if you're trying to play really, really heavy intensive games, that's probably where this phone is going to start having a few issues here and there. But other than that, as I mentioned before, I think this phone is going to be a really solid device for pretty much everything you do with it. If you're not expecting super crazy performance, if you are expecting this phone to be like one of the best performing phones of all time, obviously that's not going to quite be the case here, but regardless, it's still going to be a solid phone, and I for one really enjoy using this phone for sure. So in terms of that covers it up in the performance segment. This phone also has a 4,620 mAh battery inside. That is a massive size battery to have inside of a phone like this, and as I've mentioned before, this phone's battery life is amazingly good. It is a really good battery life because this phone doesn't have the craziest amount of specifications inside of it, for better or for worse. That kind of aids in this phone's favor just by having that capability right there. So that is also a really cool thing about this phone, and I actually like the battery life on this device a lot as well. So to kind of sum up this whole entire video, I personally do think that this phone is still completely worth it, obviously, and it's still a very good phone as well. It has a lot of capability built inside of it, and I would honestly say that if you're going to go ahead and buy a phone, this is not a bad option. However, we are very close to the Pixel 6a that, if you're already watching this video, I would just recommend buying the Pixel 6a anyway. I feel like that phone is probably the better one in almost every single area, but the Pixel 5a still has a long future ahead of it as well. And if you want a phone that you're going to use for the next probably 2 years, 3 years, this is not a bad option. If you want a phone that's going to last you longer, get the Pixel 6 or the Pixel 6 Pro. Those are very solid phones, and you cannot go wrong with those ones either. So in terms of that kind of covers it all up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that helps me so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.